I first met Fred. He was actually giving a talk at Harvard or MIT, somewhere. A lot of kids were in the audience, and he was talking about capitalism and social justice and how ecosystems are having a hard time. And I thought, wow. And then I found out he's also a professor emeritus of soil science at University of Vermont. And you can actually get his book for no money at all on the internet. You know, I've had it in my iPad for 4 years. It's a 300-page book on soil, restoring soils essentially. It's how do you make really good soil without a lot of chemicals. So Fred's quite into a lot of things, and strike up a conversation with him. He's a smart guy.
Well, this is a title that Adam and I came up with together. I don't know exactly, but this is one small part of soils and soil and plants and soil plant insects and microorganism dynamics. So it's just to try to give a taste for what's involved, the complexity of it, and the importance of it. There's certainly a lot that we can learn from the way that natural systems work and how species interact with one another. Evolution, of course, includes coevolution of species, which has been in the works for literally billions of years. And in the popularized idea of evolution, outside of this audience, which knows better, of course, competition is what is stressed. It's survival of the fittest. And the reality, of course, is that cooperation among species, within species, has been one of the major driving forces of evolution and of society, by the way. Because although we live in a society right now, which is quite competitive and quite dog-eat-dog type thing, very much into accumulation of stuff, buying more and more of whatever, for 95% of our existence as a species at least, we lived in hunting-gathering societies that stressed and encouraged cooperation and compassion and played down issues of competitiveness and individualism. And so we lived very different lives, and we are capable of living those types of lives again in a different type of society. Okay, well, I once gave a talk. I gave some students at a high school a number of subjects that they could choose from. They asked me to come give a talk. And this is the one they chose. The underappreciated natural resource, soils. The underappreciated natural resource. People think of trees and how beautiful they look, and birds, and we've heard about all these wonderful things today, and bears, and photogenic and whatever. And yet soils is one of the basic natural resources that we have. Even in the School of Natural Resources, up until now, as far as I'm aware of, a student can go through that subject matter and not take a soils course, even though it is the foundation for terrestrial life. So as Vandana Shiva put it, it's our work with living soil that provides sustainable alternatives to the triple crises of climate, energy, and food. No matter how many songs on your iPod, although I still have an iPod, but I know they're gone. Cars in your garage or books on your shelf, it is plants' ability to capture solar energy that is the root of it all. Without fertile soil, what is life? And that really is gives an idea of the importance of soils. They are the substrate and the sustenance for plants and for all terrestrial life, for all practical purposes. For soil, thou art. Okay, it's in the Bible. You come from soil. The calcium in your bones and in your teeth comes from soil. Okay, the phosphorus in you, the nitrogen in you, it all has come through soil. To plants, and then possibly on to animals, and maybe you consume the animals. So, but we literally do come from the soil. and we are literally connected with it, whether we know it or not, whether we realize it or not. In 2015, the UN declared the year of soils. So this was at least some growing appreciation for the importance of soils. And now, as you've heard, by the way, a number of themes I'll be talking about, you've heard already today about. But one of the interests in soils also is the use of soil for carbon sequestration as soil organic matter. Soil organic matter is the heart of healthy soils. It is the key to healthy soils. If people are interested in soils more, I would be happy to give you the URL to the book that was mentioned, which you can buy for $20 or download it for free as a PDF. So there is starting to be this appreciation. There is more organic matter in soils than in the atmosphere. If you're standing on a soil which has 1% organic matter, which is not much, to 7 inches deep, you have about the same amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere above that plot of land that you're standing on. Okay, just to give you some idea. So there's about 3 to 7 times more carbon in soils in the earth than in the atmosphere at any one time. So soils are complex. They have a physical dimension. There's architecture to soils. Particles are clumped together, and biological activity helps to make that happen, to form aggregates. And you have pores of different sizes. You have animals helping to make pores. So this is just a earthworm hole coming to the surface, which is of tremendous importance when you have heavy downfalls of rain. When you have channels like that coming to the surface, soils can accept a lot more rainfall, and it doesn't run off, cause erosion, flooding, etc. And so, the architecture of soils is important, as is the chemistry and the biology, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So soils are alive. Okay, soils breathe, just like we breathe in and out, and you're breathing right now, and I am. Soils breathe. The oxygen goes into the soils, and carbon dioxide comes out of the soil, just like it comes out of us. All these diverse organisms in the soils are breathing. They are, as they're just going about their normal metabolic functions, and they are. It is alive. It is living soil, as Van den Shiva said, which is the heart of it all. And what are they living on? Of course, they're living on lots of different organic materials that are in the soil, including other species. In 1 gram of soil, which is like a teaspoon, okay, which is like a penny. I looked it up yesterday on the internet. A penny is like 2.5 grams. Or say it's a half a penny, let's just say, worth of soil. You've got approximately, okay, and there are different numbers for these, but this is not a too bad one, billions of bacteria, millions of fungi, representing some 5 to 50,000 different species. Okay, this is in 1 gram of soil. So we're talking about incredible diversity of microorganisms. In addition to that, of course, you've got the myriad other species of nematodes and various types of beetles and worms I mentioned, and earthworms I mean, and etc. So you have a tremendous amount of life going on beneath your feet if you're walking over a soil. And these, by the way, are critical. And I've come at this mainly from an agricultural point of view, mainly to try to understand these issues so as to try to improve agricultural practices, to make them more ecologically sound. And that's really what the book is about an ecological approach to managing soils for agricultural purposes, to grow food, to feed people. Okay, well, let's take a look at some one thing I want to mention before. Also, soils are involved, of course, by the carbon cycle, as I mentioned. They're a very important part of the carbon cycle in the global basis, but also nitrogen cycle, and also the hydrologic cycle, which was also mentioned earlier, and we sang a song that dealt with the hydrologic cycle. And this is part of the hydrologic cycle. When the rain falls, does it go into the soil, or does it run off from the soil and go directly to the stream? And if it goes in, then it can provide water, can provide recharge of the groundwater, as well as water for plants to take up and then put back into the atmosphere through transpiration. Okay, I thought I'd show you just some, these are very short videos, but give you some idea of some of the organisms in soils. These are two species of fungi. Come on. I hope that other ones will work. I'll try to start clicking. Oh, there we go. There we go. So what you've got is two fungi, different species, growing towards each other, and the movie continues for a while. It's already stopped now, but it did continue for a while. They grew, they met, and that was it. Okay, so they're not antagonistic. They're not symbiotic. They're just two different fungi doing different things. They meet, that's fine, and they're just going to leave each other alone, and that's part of some of the dynamics that's going on in the soil. What you have in soil is a food web, which is connected, of course, to the above ground, which I'll talk about before. But you start with the lower right-hand side there, the lower left-hand side with residues in the soil and plant roots and root exudates, which I'll talk about, and those get eaten by fungi, bacteria, and then those get eaten by other organisms, and those get eaten by other organisms, and secondary and tertiary, and you have this incredible complex food web in the soil. Normally, when you think of the food web, you're thinking above ground, but there is an analogous food web going underneath the soil. And just one example, and this food web is these are amoeba that are just going about their lives eating bacteria. They're engulfing them, they just surround them, and they ingest them. And in the process, by the way, they give off, they are excreting waste products, and this helps the plants to get nitrogen and phosphorus and other things too. This is all part of the cycling of nutrients in soils, which is all biological in nature. That's the cycling. These are Paramecium also. Let's see if I can get it to work. Yeah, going about just eating bacteria there. They're moving around, moving a little faster than the amoeba, which have to, will go by cytoplasmic flow. And again, they are also part of the cycling of nutrients. Then we have, this is a picture of a photograph, this is not a video, of a nematode, which is this going from the lower left up to here. This is a heartbeat of a fungi growing in the soil. And this is a nematode. Nematodes are very different. There are numbers of different types of nematode species. And some of them feed specifically on fungi, some specifically on bacteria, some feed only on other nematodes, some are more omnivorous, omnivorous. And so this is a type of nematode that feeds on a fungi. Well, we have in soil also a fungi. This is a fungi that creates these loops. This is a nematode trapping fungus. Okay, so just keep an eye on that. Nematode comes along, gets into that lasso-like, that clamps down, and I don't show you the bitter end of this, but the nematode is killed by the fungus. The fungus then sends enzymes, excretes enzymes into the nematode, dissolves the contents that it wants, and the nematode then becomes the food source for this particular fungus. So you've got nematodes eating fungi, you've got fungi eating nematodes, and there's a lot of stuff happening down there. My God. And here's a surface-dwelling earthworm, which takes its food down into the soil. This is one of the ways that residues get from the surface down into the soil. The earthworm just takes it down into the soil, and it wants to eat in its own privacy. So plants grow in close proximity and connection with this complex microbial community, and it has all sorts of impacts of the plant living with this community. In other words, the plant, we talked before, or there was talk before about the human microbiome, and people have come to understand this in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, not that long ago, that people started talking about it and understanding it. I'm talking about the general public. But you also have a plant microbiome. Okay, so there are microorganisms that are associated with the roots in the immediate zone around the roots, which is called the rhizosphere. And then there are microorganisms which actually infect the roots. So some were mentioned before. I'll show you some more about that, about mycorrhizal fungi. And then there are also, there's the leaf microbiome. So there's the above ground microbiome, different organisms living on leaves. And you saw before a presentation, sometimes living in plants above ground in the tissue, the plant tissue. So just let me show you a couple of slides which I enjoy. I hope you'll like them too. This is a growing root, and it's just growing in soil, and it's just growing down. It's got to push its way through soil, and these are new cells coming at the root tip of the new cells. These are elongating now. This is all just elongation, and then you're going to see root hairs starting to come out. Okay, those are the root hairs coming out of the root. It stopped elongation, and you start to get maturation. At that point when root hairs start growing out. This, by the way, is from a Japanese-made video called "Life in the Soil," which is an excellent video, which I assume is available on the internet. And so this, I mean, you can't get an appreciation because they were trying to take pictures of this. But of course, this you wouldn't see a root if you're in the soil looking, because this is all covered with soil. I mean, it's all embedded in the soil. Those hyphae are embedded in soil. So let's go to the next. Where's the next one? Come on, we can do it. I go this way. Okay. So this is now the zone of maturation. That's the zone where the root hairs are going out. And soon you're going to see an individual root hair with the cytoplasm circulating in the root hair itself. I mean, I looked at this video and said, holy smokes, this is something. You can see the cytoplasm just circulating around there. Okay? So what's happening also with plants is that a relatively significant portion of what the plant produces in photosynthesis is shipped down to the roots. So we could be talking about 30, 40% I'm talking about. And of that, a significant portion is actually exuded from the root, secreted from the root, and it feeds the microbiome, all right? So that is where the food comes from the organisms that are living immediately around contact with the root. And so that is very much a rich zone with regard to microorganisms, as opposed to just a few, 2-3 millimeters away, okay, from a root. So it really is the root microbiome. This is a root tip, which is sloughing off cells as it grows. And you can see those cells coming off, and they're still active. There's things going on inside those cells. But the root tip has cells that it sort of sacrifices to the soil in order to let the root continue to grow, and it helps to lubricate the movement in the soil, and it just keeps producing. Okay, so in that rhizosphere, you have many organisms, and a speaker mentioned before about how few of bacteria are human pathogens, and the same thing is true in soils. The very, very few organisms, fungi or bacteria, are pathogens of plants that will infect plants or attack plants. And that most of them are either doing something which promotes plant growth. In fact, there's a whole group of organisms which they refer to as plant growth promoting organisms. Okay, that's the title they've given to it. And they produce hormones that stimulate plant growth. They produce a stimulus to the plants, as I'll talk about, that have them then produce defense mechanisms, defense chemicals for diseases and insects. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so there are two major types of cooperation, if you will, or symbiotic relationships between plants and microorganisms. There are many, okay, but there are two major ones, I would say. And one which has been mentioned more than once today has been the mycorrhizal association. And almost all plants have mycorrhizae, and most of the plants that we grow for food have vesicular, arbuscular mycorrhizae, which actually infect the root and produce those arbuscules that were mentioned before. And you can see them in the diagram on the left-hand side of a cross-section of the root. And there's only one thing wrong with this diagram, by the way, and it is, I mean, it's in the book, but there's going to be a new edition of this book, so watch out for the soils book, Building Soils with Better Crops. This will be an improved diagram at that point. But the root hair is, I mean, the mycorrhizae should have been much longer in comparison with the root hair, because one of the things that mycorrhizae does or do is tremendously extend the root system. Okay, so it helps plants to get phosphorus and water especially, but other nutrients too. And they're much longer and will connect with other plants, as was mentioned too, which promotes communication between plants. And so this is not to proper scale between the root hair and the mycorrhizal fungi. This is what a wheat plant looks like, a wheat root looks like with its mycorrhizal fungi around it. And you can see also, I'll show you a better picture of it later, there are spores at the end of some of those fungi, which are mycorrhizal spores, which then will germinate and produce fungi for the next crop or the next generation, if you will. And one of the things, by the way, about mycorrhizal fungi in agriculture is there are things we can do to promote their presence. And one of those things is to plant cover crops. In other words, don't leave the soil bare during the wintertime, plant a cover crop. And one of the things that cover crops do, cover crops have many effects on soils, but one of them is that they will enhance the number of spores that will germinate in the spring, because they are mycorrhizal too. And then the mycorrhizae live on them, produce more spores, and those spores will be ready for the spring for when you're going to plant your agricultural crops. So this is just what the spores look like at a terminal point of the hyphae. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that mycorrhizae produce not only more root growth and more vigorous plants, better nutrients and water, as I mentioned, mainly by extending the root system. They promote chemicals that actually, which I'll talk about in a second, they're not the only ones, promote chemicals that cause the plant to protect itself from herbivores, from insects that are feeding on it. They also produce sticky substances, and there are many plants themselves, the roots themselves produce a mucigel, a mucilaginous material, which really is very rich in microorganisms and makes the connection with the particles in the soil and helps soil form aggregates. And the mycorrhizal fungi do the same thing. The material is called glomalin in soils, and this is believed to be one of the major repositories of carbon in soils, and also one of the ways that promotes aggregation and aggregate stability in soils. Okay, so what I wanted to show now was a couple of different mechanisms that occur with microorganisms in plants, and then make the connection with that and the above ground. Okay, so the plant is really is sort of a bridge between the soil and the above ground part of the earth, if you will. And the plant is in both. Of course, the roots are in the soil, and the shoots and the leaves are above the ground. And so the plant is this bridge. So one of the phenomena that occur with regard to microorganisms, plants, and diseases is that there are different types of systems for resistance to diseases. And one of them is called systematically acquired resistance, that's SAR. That's not important. But there are disease organisms, but also non-pathogenic organisms in the soil, stimulate the roots. The roots produce salicylic acid, okay, which you know from aspirin, I guess. And the salicylic acid then is translocated up into the stem, and that then stimulates the production of defensive chemicals. Those will defend plants against attack by pathogens. There's another system, okay, of defense, another defense system plants use, and this is called induced resistance or induced systemic resistance. And these are plant growth promoting rhizobacter living in the rhizosphere of soils, stimulate plant growth to produce ethylene and jasmonate, which offer themselves, they then will stimulate other production of other chemicals, which induce a resistance to a wide variety of plant diseases. So one of the critical take-home messages here, I mean, to me anyway, is that it is soil diversity, a biological diversity in the soil that allows this to happen. And a soil rich in organic matter induces this rich biodiversity. As soils become depleted in organic matter, what happens is you get lower and lower numbers of species, fewer species in the soil, less biodiversity, more problems with diseases, more problems with insects, for a number of reasons. And so this is, to me, as I mentioned before, organic matter is really the heart of the story. This next example, which is connected because mycorrhizal fungi play a part in this, but there are also other organisms that do this as well. And the plants do it on their own, separately. This is what happens when plants are attacked by insects. So an herbivore comes, just its natural thing. There's a caterpillar there on this cotton plant, but it could be a tomato plant, and we had problems with hornworm. I don't know if any of you garden here run into the hornworm caterpillar. Those are big caterpillars. I mean, you don't want to mess with them. I mean, you pick one up, one of the big ones, they'll rear back. So anyway, I'll show you a picture of that because there's something interesting with regard to this with the hornworm. But when caterpillars start feeding on plants, there are a number of defense mechanisms that plants use. One of them, and this is stimulated, this is helped by mycorrhizal fungi, is that plants produce chemicals that basically give the insect indigestion. You know, it really slows down the feeding. Okay, so it's just slowing them down from doing the damage. And then the next one is that they emit volatile substances. These are gases that come off that are specifically calling to a particular beneficial insect, not any old insect, but an insect that wants to lay its eggs in that particular caterpillar. Okay, most of these are wasps. Okay, they're little tiny wasps. They don't sting people or anything like that, and they are attracted by the odor, that is, by these chemicals that are emitted, to lay their eggs in that particular caterpillar. Okay, this wasp will not lay its eggs in other caterpillars, right? And as the eggs develop inside the caterpillar, it kills the caterpillar. And so this is a biological defense mechanism. A third one that the plant does is it produces, at the feeding wound, it produces a nectar, just a sugary substance, which is a source of food for the adult, that is the wasp, you know, the non-larval form of that insect. It's a source of food because that's what they eat. This wasp doesn't eat this caterpillar. It gets its sustenance from flowers and from feeding wounds and things like that. So a plant has basically three different mechanisms here that it's using to defend itself when it's attacked by an herbivore. Well, this I thought was pretty hot stuff. I really did. And when I learned about it, I didn't do research on this, but I learned about this. It's a whole long story how I learned about it, which I find interesting, but you may not. But I'm not going to tell you. But then I was reading an article at Scientific American. And this brings us back to the hornworm caterpillar. The particular wasp that lays its eggs in the hornworm caterpillar also injects a virus. If the virus isn't there, this is a story in the article, the virus is necessary to deactivate the immune system of the caterpillar. If the virus isn't there, the eggs get destroyed. So this is one of the few articles I've read, and I've just sat back in my chair. And I put it down, and I said, this is absolutely amazing. You know, this is better than any novel I could have read. Or, I mean, it may show you my limited interest, I don't know. But but just the whole idea of how coevolution developed this, that you have a dual system here involved where the virus is a very important part of this system. If anybody wants this stuff, by the way, I have the article, and you can get it in Scientific American, I think in the late 1990s. So they did experiments where they took the virus out, and they proved that the virus was absolutely necessary for the larvae to develop. Without that, it would not have happened. So I want to leave you with two things. Okay, first off, I want to show you this. Okay, this, the next slide. This is the last slide. This is on the back cover of the book on soils. Which, if you were a plant, would you rather be growing in? The soil on the left or the soil on the right? Nobody wants to take the left, right? Okay, this was from the Rodale Institute in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. This was the same soil about 15 years before. That was treated differently. These were managed differently. The one on the right was basically an organic management in good rotations using animal manure. Okay, the one on the left was conventional. Okay, production of grain for sale. And you can see just from the color, you can get an idea of the structure of the soil, of the aggregates there. And so this is the difference in soil management makes between, this is a healthy soil, and the one on your left is definitely an unhealthy soil. And that creates problems for plants that are growing on it, insect problems, disease problems, etc. Okay, I wanted to leave, I may take an extra minute or two, since I was on time. I've got to run over a little bit. But one of the issues to me is, okay, we know a lot, and we're going to learn a lot more about how ecosystems function and how we can learn from them. And I've written about it. There was a book back there on creating an ecological society, which has whole sections about what we can learn from nature, not just about agriculture, about other aspects too. But the real question is, why aren't these being used more extensively? Okay, they're being used by relatively few farms, maybe the ones that you know, but if you look at the greater scheme of things, by relatively few farms. And the problem, in my mind, is that we have a type of a system which induces, or in some cases almost forces, people in a certain direction and to use certain technologies. I wrote an article, which you'll know from the title of the article what my orientation is, but a rational agriculture is incompatible with capitalism. And if anybody wants the article, it's a monthly review. I've got a copy. I can send it to you by PDF or whatever. But what I did is I went through step by step by saying, why do these things happen? How do they happen? And tried to describe those. And that's one of the articles I've gotten the most positive feedback on that I've written. And the most interesting thing is that a lot of that feedback came from farmers. And I gave that presentation about that article to organic farmers in Vermont this last February. So it's February of 2018. And the room was full. Okay, it was a small room, I must admit, but there were 60 people there. There was no seating room. I mean, there were people on the floor. And I could see these farmers, shaking their heads. They knew what I was talking about. They knew the story. Of course, these are organic farmers, not conventional farmers, but still. So I wanted to leave you with that we know a lot. First off, nature is incredible. You know that already. It tells us, it can show us many different ways to behave in our interaction with the environment as we do what we need to do to get our sustenance. It can show us how to do it better, okay? And we have to learn how to do that. But we also need a system which encourages us to do that, instead of a system which encourages us to go in very destructive directions. Anyway, thank you. Sorry for running over.